Well, hello. I'm Cindy Gay from the Metis Group. Thanks for joining us again today for the second session. As you may recall, this is an excerpt of a longer program on succession called You're Tired, Your Key Leaders Are Aging or Maxed Out, and we're in the middle of a great resignation. Now what? This is part 2. The next one, which is part 3, and we'll wrap things up, is going to be on July 20th. So make sure you join us then. If you missed the first one and you wanted to listen to the recording, it's a little tricky. You can either email me and we'll make sure we send you the link, or you can go to themetisgroup.com/ 4 words with a hyphen between each one, succession planning webinar documents, hyphen between each one and a backslash. And that'll let you go to the recording. Or like I said, just email us and we'll send it to you along the way. I'm going to share my screen now so we can start the presentation right away. And if you have any questions, it turns out you need to, or comments even, you need to put them in the questions area. And Michael Phillips, who's our Executive Vice President of Business Development, is standing next to me. He is also going to be manning that or personing that to make sure that if anybody has any comments, he can raise them to my attention and we can address those. What we have are the 3 pillars of succession, part 2, as I mentioned earlier. And we're talking about the perfect storm. You might remember this slide from last time, but we've changed up some of the bullet points a little bit. We're talking about a lot of different things. We just uncluttered, we saved some of the bullet points for this time that didn't all quite fit last time. But we have all kinds of political turmoil that we're dealing with as leaders. We've got this war over in the Ukraine and with Russia dealing with them. First quarter was a little spooky for all of us. All of the economists, including the ITR guys who are considered one of the most predictive of the economists, really didn't see the little downtick that we had in the first quarter until February came along. And I think it just spooked everybody. We did not know the extent to which the US was going to be involved. We didn't understand the extent to which it was going to impact gas prices. We get that now. We didn't understand the extent to which it was going to further impact supply chain and things like that. In addition to that, we've got all kinds of heightened sensitivities over everything political, everything educational, everything healthcare, and we kind of feel like we're walking on eggshells as leaders. And then, of course, we've got the social media that's taking everything in. To be able to put something on social media, it doesn't need to be accurate, it just needs to be your opinion. And the regular media seems to love to, kind of fan those flames a little bit. And it always seems to me that if there's no real significant news happening, that's when they get a little crazier at just kind of stirring things up a bit. In addition to that, we have an aging workforce that we're going to talk about a little bit more today in today's session than we did the last time. We know it's aging. We know that the baby boomers were the largest of all of the generations. The next generation, the Xers, which is my part, was somewhat smaller, but the Y and Z generations are smaller yet. Now, we have yet to hear about how many babies are coming out of the COVID thing. What are they calling them? Coronials instead of millennials. And so, how many babies are going to be coming from all these people being sequestered? But it's going to be 20 years before they really hit the workforce. So we're dealing with this labor challenge that we've got. And with this labor challenge, because we really haven't been producing enough humans for decades, the labor challenge is quite significant because we can't just post and pray for respondents that way. We really can't just put it on LinkedIn or put it on Indeed and expect people to respond. They're just not doing that anymore. And so we have to be far more strategic, far more creative, sometimes old school, sometimes new school, trying to go after these folks. We've also got the challenges in this labor market of remote working. And there is no doubt when people are working remotely, they feel more disengaged from your culture, from your vision. They get also very involved in very tactical activities. So when you are all in the workplace, They had to fill the 8-hour day when we're all around them. They now will make comments that you're probably hearing like, oh, I'm so more productive at home, which really just means I'm getting stuff done off my list, which is very tactical. And the more we're drawn into the tactical, the more we lose the big picture or the ability to see the system at large. And so the idea of ever working on the important, not urgent stuff goes down dramatically. And when we don't use the strategic part of our brain, since the brain is like any other muscle, it will atrophy if it's not used. And that drives us more into tactical stuff. So this whole remote working, when it's constant, I'm not talking if it's hybrid, but if it's constant, is really impacting that big picture stuff. It's also impacting innovation. You listen to Pat Lencioni, Jim Collins, Simon Sinek. Now we even have Elon Musk saying this is critical. This remote working is really having an impact on the culture. It's having an impact on the innovations specifically, and they're calling that out not just in the US but worldwide. And then of course we've got economic worries. These gas prices, for those of you who know my husband John, who's also my business partner, he happened to make a trip up to Michigan today and he sent me a picture of a gas station sign. $5.39 per gallon if you pay cash. So it's more if it's credit, and of course if it's diesel. So that's crazy. It's also making it more difficult to convince people to come into the workforce or the workplace when they also have to pay higher gas prices. We've got the housing market going berserk, and supply chain issues, as we mentioned earlier, are a little bit crazy right now. So as leaders, we're dealing with all of this stuff all at once. And people nervous about the next strain of COVID or the monkeypox or whatever's going on, and there's just all of this stuff as leaders. And in the first session, we talked about how exhausting it is to be a leader, and that it may not be the fun it once was when we started things up. So as we look forward as leaders, we talked about the 3 pillars of succession that we are addressing in these webinars. The first one was on the leader who's exhausted or tired or just, it's not fun anymore. The second one we're talking about today, and this is where your people who are in leadership or even significant contributors in the organization are either aging out or they're just maxed out for one reason or another. And then the last one we're going to talk about is the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle, depending on the way you want to consider it. These are a few of our clients that we've accumulated in our 26 years of business. And as I looked at the attendee list, some of you may see your own logos up here. So thank you very much. You can tell that there is no specific industry with whom we work. I did start the business in Metro Detroit 26 years ago, and about 10 years later, expanded it into Charlotte, and then we commuted back and forth every month for 15 years. One of the greatest things that came out of COVID is our realization that we can and we do everything now virtually, so that we didn't have to have 2 offices and 2 homes. While we still have team members in the Metro Detroit area and in Charlotte, John and I are happy to call our home and our headquarters now in Davidson, North Carolina. And of course, we still work all over, primarily North America. So let's get into it. When we're looking for our leadership succession, the question first is, when is the right time to plan for succession? And of course, the answer is, it's already too late, right? No matter when you're thinking of starting, now is the best time. Do not put it off, because the sooner you get started, the sooner you can be selective. You're not going to feel like all of a sudden you're thrown into something. The sooner you can be selective into who you're bringing on board, and the sooner you can get that person into a development plan, because if they have been a significant contributor within the organization elsewhere, they're going to need to pass those things on to someone else so they can take on some new responsibilities. If you're bringing somebody in from the outside, even if they've done the exact same job someplace else, they still need to be able to learn your culture, really embrace it, and really be able to hit the ground running. And that usually still takes 3 to 6 months before the individual you've just hired from the outside, no matter how fluent in the role, to really feel like they themselves are making a significant contribution. So the thing that you need to remember is identifying the key aspects of each job. Not everything each of us does is significant in our roles, but each of us has significant pieces of our job that if we weren't here or somebody wasn't doing them, it would really put the organization in a difficult spot. So identify those, and then as we'll talk a little bit further, identify the right person to do each piece. I think when jobs were a little less complicated, a little less sophisticated, we didn't have all this stuff that I showed you in that perfect storm coming at us. It was easier when you had an accountant and you needed to plan for a succession to bring in somebody else to do that whole job. It is far more difficult, especially when you're talking about leadership roles, because frequently the leadership role is a reflection of the person in the role and what they individually bring to it as well. So it's really important for us to think about the difference between the person and the role and what we need out of that. What I'd like to do is launch a poll for you all to contribute to, and let's hope this technology works well. And if you could please check off, what is your current plan for people you're anticipating are going to retire? All right, we've got a couple of people. We've got about 10% of the folks have voted. It's doubled. There we go. We're getting up there. Half of the group has voted. We'll give it a second or two more. Looks like a couple of people are distracted. It's pretty funny that the software tells us who's distracted. So we got 75% of the votes in. We have 25% appoint their second in command to that role. The same amount said, we don't have any upcoming retirees, so maybe I should slide through this stuff. The largest amount is about 30% who would say they'd recruit from the outside. 6% of you said, we'll try to talk them out of retiring. And 18% said they split their job into parts others can do. So the highest one was recruit from the outside. Then we have a tie at appoint their second in command, or we don't have any retirees. Then we have split their job into parts others can do, and talk them out of retiring. So that was the first poll. As we move on from there, we'll see the reason it's important to consider these retirees is that if you look at the group that's 16 to 24 years old, and this is as of late 2021, you'll see the percentage is slightly declining. So some of them are exiting the workplace. You can see those from 25 to 54 are declining. And the only group that is increasing as a percentage of the workforce is 55 and older. I think there are a few reasons for this, especially for those in their mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s. You may remember in the last session, I referred to that as the young parent panic, which is where the parents are both trying to work remotely and they have kids in daycare or school, and these young ones come home because of an exposure to COVID someplace in the classroom. And so now the parents are trying to work and they're trying to manage this child coming home. And of course, you can't just let a 3-year-old, manage themselves while you're on a 2-hour Zoom call or webinar. So then by the time that child goes back to school, one of your other children comes home. And so somebody throws up their hands and says, one of us has to be a full-time parent and the other has to work. So I think we're losing some of the folks in the workforce in the blue and the red as a result of that. But we have to come to the realization that the labor force is getting older and that we have to deal with that. We also have to deal with the fact that as our business continues to grow, if we have not developed the people who work for us, there is going to be a gap. I was in one of my forum groups a few years ago, and our chair challenged us in January to report back on what our revenue growth was relative to what our revenue goal was. So not even what the performance was year over year, but the difference to goal. And one of our members said, well, he was 43% over goal. Not just so of course we were all applauding and thinking this was fabulous. And he said, no. It dawned on me, if my company grew by 43%, what did I do to grow myself by 43%? And then I just thought, well, shoot, what if you grow your business just 5% year over year and you're not growing your team 5% year over year? You're still going to have this gap. So if this is the person you brought in, you notice that their performance is over what the business needed initially. In fact, it was probably so good. We said, oh, you're so great. Now that you're doing that, can you do this too? And oh, you're still doing great. Can we give you this? Can we give you this? And of course, when we keep doing that, we wind up with an individual who is doing a job that nobody in their right mind would have done from the outside. But at some point, when we get a gap like this, if that person has not developed, we are either going to have to add additional people or replace this person, despite the fact that at one point they were a superstar for us. And so this is what we mean by even maxing out at some point, because they could have been significant, but they could have maxed out. And of course, we have to deal with that. So what I'd like to do is launch another poll and see what you guys can tell me is your plan for leaders who are maxed out. Some of this is also around the folks who you might have brought on when you started your business, and you all were in the, in the garage together, putting it together, and you were all excited about what everybody was going to do, and you promised them all, thanks for making all these sacrifices and skipping dinner and changing your vacation plans. I really appreciate everything. Someday we're going to all run this phenomenal job, this phenomenal company together. We're all going to lead it into the future. And then all of a sudden, 10 years later, you look around the table and you go, shoot, you guys can't lead. Now what am I going to do? So we've got about 38% of the votes in so far. Up to 57. I'm impressed with some of the results. We'll see. We'll get it a little bit more. We've got 67% in. All right. It's like some of you took a page out of our playbook. The number one response by far is divide their job up into manageable categories. That was 53% of the vote. The next one was develop and hope they improve. And we all know hope is not a strategy, but that was 22% of the vote. And then find a different role for them was the fourth one. And at 11% of the vote, we had sever employment. Nobody said we don't have any leaders who are maxed out. So everybody on this call, at least to some extent, is feeling the pressure that we might be having some people a little overextended. So it's important for us to figure out what we can do with those folks. And I promise you, I am going to show you some of those techniques before this day is over. So again, some of the people who got you here won't get you there. The challenge we have with that too is very frequently when we started our business with those folks who were in the garage with us, so to speak, putting everything together, we wanted to reward them for all those sacrifices they made. I mean, these were the martyrs of our organization, right? They worked crazy hours and they'd come in on the weekends and they'd have late nights. And we thought we were rewarding them by taking them out to dinner afterwards, after they'd been away from their family for 65, 70 hours a week. And so these poor folks did everything, and we promised them we're going to reward you one day. So these are the people who wore that Superman cape. They came flying in. They would do whatever we needed. They were individual contributors, and that's what we loved about them. And then we tell them, now you're going to lead. So wait, what do you mean I have to lead? What do you mean I have to help you get other people to know what I know? What are you going to appreciate me for? You've always appreciated me for what I personally did. How am I going to, what are you going to love about me if everybody else who works for me can do that? So we're shifting the playing field, and frequently we have to accept the fact that the people who got you here are just not going to get you there. It's a different type of person. They're used to being significant individual contributors. And even if they want to do the best thing for your organization, even if they want to be the best leader, especially if they haven't developed over time and there isn't this natural ability to do that, they may get overwhelmed. Now, many of you who are on this line have used many of our assessments, and one of them, which is the Hartman Value Profile, is phenomenal because it shows us the capacity of somebody, whether or not they've ever had real experience doing something. So where we used to take the best computer programmer or the best salesperson and throw them into the leadership role, and then we quickly learn we've lost the really good individual contributor and we have a worse leader, we now realize we have the capacity to realize if someone has the basic capacity to do leadership. Do they have a good capacity at correcting others, leading others, creating followership, these types of things? It doesn't mean it doesn't need to be polished up a little bit in some personal development, but they have that raw capacity so that we can stop from doing some of those things right up front. But we have to accept the fact that not everybody that we started with, no matter how we love them, are really able to do that. And it's a challenge because people want to really create value. It's important to say, is there anything they can do to add value? I mean, there are times that I'm in group settings, I'll ask everybody to raise your hand, or anybody to raise your hand if you got up thinking, how can I be a loser today? And of course, maybe there's a wise guy who raises his hand or her hand, but generally speaking, nobody responds to that. We all want to feel like we're making a significant contribution. We all want to feel like we're doing something that's adding value. And so if we're coming in every day and we realize we're not hitting the mark, then as leaders, we're not doing these folks any favors by keeping them in that role just so they have a job when they feel horrible every day coming in. So now we also have to think about people who are in the wrong seat. These are the folks who may bleed your culture. They're really good human beings. They live all your core values, but gosh darn, they are not getting the job done. Could be that they used to get the job done, but they're not anymore. But they absolutely are missing more times than they're making those things. So let's go to another poll. And what is your plan for dealing someone who's in the wrong seat? We have free them up to pursue success elsewhere, hope it gets better, identify a different seat for them, explore their aspirations, and we don't have anyone in the wrong seat. See, we've got a couple of votes in. We're up to 40% of the votes. Ooh, everybody just kicked into high gear. I'm up to 65% of the votes. Wow, we have people, we're voting for voting. All right, so we've got a good 95% of our attendees are voting. Woohoo! So the number one answer is 70% of you said identify a different seat for them. That's fabulous. Those of you who have large enough organizations who can do that, that is a wonderful option. The next option, long distance second at 20% of the vote, was free them up to pursue success elsewhere. And the only other item that was checked off at 10% of the vote was explore their aspirations. I think that's important. I mean, even if you're looking at a different seat for them, taking them aside and asking them what they want to do. Sometimes you'll find that retirement might be part of it. Sometimes you'll find that they'd really like to work part-time because they want to spend more time with the spouse or a parent who's aging, or grandchildren or something like that, and they don't need full-time anymore, but they want to have some professional identity. So I think it's important to consider what their aspirations are in any case. And then, of course, one of the things you really need to do is plan for those separations. And this is never easy. It's not something any of us enjoy doing. I don't care how frustrating, unless you find somebody who's been stealing from you or something. It's never an easy decision to let someone go. It's always very difficult. This is our last poll that I'm going to ask you to complete. So what can you do to ease a separation? This is our last poll. About 20% of the vote in. And we're rapidly getting more in, up to 52%, 60%, 70%, 80%. So it's getting great. Okay, so some of the things that we have here, we're up to 77%. There really were only 3 that were identified. 71% of you said provide some transition assistance. I'll come back to that in a minute. That's a great one. 24% said provide severance, and 11% said agree on internal and external message, which is also critical. So one of the reasons that providing transition assistance is so critical is the more you allow people to leave with grace and dignity, the less likely they are to come back at you, right? So allowing them to do that, allowing them to land on their feet, helping with them with transition has a wide array of choices for you. In the old days, we would hire an outplacement service that would take a leader and give them an office, and for a year, they would be coached in finding a new job, et cetera. And that was wonderful for those roles, but what about some of the other ones? Many years ago, one of our clients challenged us and said, hey, I know you guys don't do this, but with everything you do with selection, could you flip it over and help some of our folks that we're going to have to lay off land on their feet? And I remember saying, yeah, we don't do that. And they said, we started that way, but we want you to figure out how. And so we did some of that specifically to help people in that search. The cool thing is when you are doing something to help somebody with transition, it doesn't even need to be that elaborate. It could be asking your HR person or somebody on at these Catapult, which is the Society of Employers in the Carolinas, or the American Society of Employers in Michigan, one of those folks, to help somebody put a resume together. Help them practice interviewing, especially if it was someone who's been with you since dirt, somebody who helped you start this company and whatever. It's been forever since they interviewed. So why not give them some practice? Help them understand what behavior-based interview questions are. Help them understand how to tell a story, how to shake a hand. And like I said, put resumes together. Any of those simple things help them figure out what to do. Or as we talked about some assessments in the past, help them understand themselves better. I don't know if any of you have brought somebody in for an interview and say, so what are you looking to do? And they say, I'll do anything. Yeah, that doesn't really help me as an interviewer. I have no clue where to put you. But the more you can speak to the things you do well or that you love doing, the easier it is for an interviewer to identify where it is you could work best. The second piece, which 11% of you said you did, was agreeing on an internal or an external message. This is really important. There's nothing worse than saying, we just parted ways with Joey. When Joey's saying, I found an opportunity I just wasn't looking for, but I couldn't turn down. So make sure that both of you figure out what you want to say to other team members, as well as what the message outside is going to be, so that everybody feels comfortable with what that message is, and you don't have to pull out a 3x5 card to read what that says. So, all right, for succession planning for opportunities. So this is where you have an opening that has come up and you need to plan, or one is coming up, whether it's because of a retiree, you can see a leader who's maxed out, somebody's going to be maxing out. And so these are, by the way, you have 3 documents in your handouts. And the first one is going to be a sample. This is a blank one for you to actually fill out, and you can put in the leader's title. So if Joey's one of the ones leaving, you can put that in there. What's the trigger? In other words, you can see down here the key at the bottom. Are they retiring? Are they maxed out? Are they in the wrong seat? They otherwise need to separate. When are they leaving, or when do you guess they're leaving? And what are their key job functions? So let me give you an example here. For those of you who have worked with our accountability matrices or performance acceleration trackers, you'll notice that there's always those categories of functions within a job. So here was one of our favorite CFOs who was preparing to retire, and he was going to retire in December. He did finance, of course. He was in charge of governance. He was interacting with the board a lot and the CEO. He was a member of a leadership team. He did strategy and planning. He was in charge of HR, and he also handled Europe operations from Milwaukee. So this is kind of crazy. So they knew that what they really needed to do is split it up. And they figured that this Marty guy could handle Europe operations on top of what he was doing. It was relatively small, but Marty was already handling some folks in Europe. Actually, I think it's Scotland, so he could handle that. Dave was somebody who ran the largest part of their HR function, and he could step up and just take over the HR role and backfill Dave's previous HR role. But they knew that this HR role really needed to be its own function now. It couldn't just be one piece, one sixth of the pieces that a CFO was doing. But the other 4 logically stood on their own as a CFO role, and they could go through the selection process to replace that. So remember when we talked about breaking the position into pieces, it allows you to say, what's a logical job anyway, right? Remember we talked about you could have an outstanding performer and keep lumping on crazy things onto that job until it resembles, like, who would ever give HR and Europe operations to a normal CFO who was coming in from the outside? So it made more sense to have these 4 pieces, the finance, governance, leadership team, and strategy and planning, for a normal CFO that we'd hire from the outside, elevate somebody else, Dave, to take on the HR role and backfill Dave's job, and add Europe operations, which was relatively small and already literally in the backyard of Marty. So that's in your first sample worksheet. The second worksheet shows Stephanie, who was maxed out. And in Stephanie's case, she is a phenomenal controller and would do anything for the organization. Again, bleeds for the organization. She's amazing. But as other people were failing in their role, typically they would take something and add it on to what Stephanie already was doing as controller because they weren't confident in anybody else. So in this case, Stephanie was doing training. She was doing accounting, planning, budgeting. She handled IT, which included the help desk. No, she did not have an IT background originally. And compliance training. So what they realized was the real stuff that belonged with a controller was accounting, planning, and budgeting, and that needed to stay with Stephanie. And then they needed to hire somebody from the outside in human resources, which became a woman named Tammy, and they gave her the training and the compliance training. So this is, and the regular training is the employee training onboarding, the development of folks inside the organization, and then compliance is a big piece of them, and she would be in charge of that, but bringing some other resources in from the inside or outside for that. And then when it came to IT, they were just going to outsource that to a maintenance firm who could handle all of those activities for them. So you can see when you break it apart, it makes it much easier for someone, for you as the leader, to decide how to break things up, and a little bit easier for the person in the role to be excited. The other thing that was nice was we were able to help Stephanie know how much she was appreciated for all the sacrifices she was making doing all of this other crazy stuff, and that the plan was in place to make sure we created a scorecard or that performance acceleration tracker for her relative to real controller stuff, and that we were working to help the organization put the other pieces where they belonged. And she was more than happy to help get us through that and help with the transition to make sure it was done correctly. Again, you've got the worksheet exercise in there that you can do and you can use to fill out for the folks that are in your role so that you can put those plans in place. And as I promised you last time, we'd probably be about 30 to 40 minutes in the regular conversation for this, and that we could then go to questions that y'all might have. Go ahead and list them in the question piece. And we will be happy to answer some of those for you. Again, here is the link, the metasgroup.com succession planning webinar documents. This is what I was talking to earlier. If you'd like to listen to the first recording, and if I were a betting person, I bet, Michael, you think it's true that this recording is going to be out there at some point too?
It definitely will be.
It definitely will be, he says. Okay. Do we have any questions out there?
We do have a couple. What do I do if I do not have anyone internal for succession?
The question is, what do I do if I don't have anybody internal for succession? I'd still break up the job into pieces and see if it still looks like it's one job. If not, you can then decide how to make it most attractive to somebody coming in from the outside. Again, remember this crazy labor market we've had. So you want it to look as enticing as possible. And maybe there might be a piece or two that you might be able to spin off and outsource. That's becoming a more logical option as well. But don't be afraid to look outside, but the sooner you start, the better, especially if there needs to be some overlap for some training or transitioning. Any other questions?
I have another question. What if there is pushback for succession?
Oh, great question. What if there's pushback for succession? The first thing is I recommend don't walk up to, you know what, I'm going to take us off the shared screen and go back to my video here so y'all can see me talking. So the best thing is do not walk up to somebody and say, hey, we want to document all the stuff that you're doing on your job so we can find a new person to do it for you. Right? That's not going to go over really well. But again, if you start off with a conversation around, hey, where do you see yourself in the next 3 to 5 years? You're not bringing up the retirement word, you're not, right? But you're asking about their aspirations. Maybe they want to do a different role in the organization. Maybe they'd like to work part-time. Okay, so once you have that out there, then you can say, all right, well then in order to do that, we're going to have to peel back some of the other stuff that you're doing. And we're going to have to find somebody else who's prepared to do those things so you can enjoy that stuff you've been looking forward to. So a lot of it really comes down to the packaging. And if you have a specific tough nut you're trying to crack, a member of our team be happy to talk to you a little bit more about that, maybe talk to you about what their style's like so we can give you the talking points to make sure you're not inadvertently using words for a particular style that's going to trigger some bad reaction. You can use words that will be more appropriate for them.
I have another question. What if one of my employees thinks they are ideal for the job, but there is no chance?
That's a great. What if one of my employees thinks they're ideal for the job, but there's no chance? This is where that scorecard becomes really important. And if you remember, especially in the first webinar, we showed you that scorecard or that performance acceleration tracker. The best thing would be to sit down with that person and show them that pat and say, so tell me about the things you feel fully qualified to do right now. Tell me about the things you'd need some personal development on. When you force them to go through it line item by line item, I think you'll get a more candid response about it. And if they say, well, I'm willing to learn and grow and develop into all of it, and you might say, happy to do that for the longer term, but we need somebody right now. So we might have to go to the outside, but happy to groom you for this role at some point in the future, because we should always be grooming folks for that. But the other thing is if they think they're really qualified for everything, and as you're going through it and they hit on something that you know they're not ready for, it allows you to say, really? Convince me why you think you are perfectly prepared to do that right now. And or give me some examples of times you've actually been doing that. You might be surprised that they actually have had some experience in it. More likely, you're going to get the, and then you can say, okay, well, let's set that one aside. And then you can challenge them on some other things gently, but bringing to their attention that maybe they're not as competent in that particular area as they thought.
I have another one. You have a loyal teammate that you promoted into management, and he's not proven to be good in the new role. Should he move on, be demoted back to his old role if it's still open?
Okay, I'm going to see if I can summarize that because I'm not sure everybody can hear on the mic. So this was a question. You have a teammate you promoted into leadership that it turns out they're not it, and should they be freed up to pursue success elsewhere? Should they be demoted? What do you do with them? Oh, it's always tough. Again, I start with everybody wants to feel like they're wildly successful in a role, like they're adding value. Nobody wants to feel like they're failing. So there's a couple of things that we can do. There are some things you can do to sit down with them first and say, so how do you think everything's going? Hopefully you've developed enough trust with this person that they can say, I don't know, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Or they're challenged with stuff and they may admit it. If they say, everything's awesome, this is great, leadership's a piece of cake, it might be time to use a survey, a 360 survey. A good one, there's some really, really, really lousy ones out there, so be careful which ones you use. We could talk you through some of those to give them a little bit more of a clearer picture in the mirror of how they're being perceived. But then I'd ask them, what would you like to do instead? Some of them will say, I'd rather go back and just do sales. Just let me do sales. I don't want to manage these sales guys. They're crazy, right? Or sometimes they'll say, I don't know, maybe it's time for me to move on. In which case you can work on a transition together of let us try to help you land on your feet, maybe even give you time for some interviews. You help us try to work through a transition of somebody else who might be able to fulfill the role. It takes a little bit more gentle prodding. It's rare, but I have seen it where someone takes a step back willingly and can be a phenomenal contributor to the team again. I tend to see that most actually in sales, where the sales guy really loves everything about sales, and yet when they go into a sales leadership role, which they thought was going to be amazing, it's not nearly as rewarding, and they just missed the hunt, as one of our favorite clients calls it, and letting them go back hunting is what's really rewarding to them. Any other questions?
I have one more as of now.
Okay, last question.
What if I think someone needs to retire, but they don't?
What if I think someone needs to retire, but they don't? I guess the best thing to do, again, is have a conversation with them about, hey, so where do you see yourself in the next 2 or 3 years or 5 years, whatever time frame you're thinking. And if they say, oh, I plan on dying at my desk, right? You could just simply say, yeah, that's not a really good plan for us. And then maybe just say, hey, I'm not pushing you into retirement. I don't want to do that, but I think we should have a plan. So when you're ready, we're not all scrambling. So let's talk about your favorite parts of your job that you really don't want to let go of. And maybe it's time to let go of some of the other things. And then little by little, we piece that out or say to somebody, so if you were going to retire, and so these are some of the best questions you're going to have. If you were going to retire, what would you do? What would you do with your time? You might hear golfing or boating or spending time with grandkids or spending time with my spouse or traveling, right? And so what can we do then to help position you for that travel? You know, what does your savings look like to allow you to do it in the style that you prefer? But the more excited you can get them towards where they're headed, the easier it is for them to let go of what they've been holding on to. So again, talk to them about their future, and that's the best way to get them to move forward.
That is the last question I see at this time.
All right, last question. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Remember, the next one is going to be on July 20th, and we'll deal with, we're now in the great resignation or reshuffle. Now what do we do? If any of you have any other questions, you know how to reach us. My email is Cindy, spelled CYNDI, @themetisgroup.com. Again, thank you all and have a wonderful week.